In this episode, we speak with Jeremy Almond, the founder and CEO of Paystand, whose software makes it possible to digitize receivables, automate processing, reduce time to cash, eliminate transaction fees, and enable new revenue. In 2013, Jeremy was on a mission to create a more open financial system, starting with B2B payments. Using blockchain and cloud technology, Paystand pioneered payments as a service to digitize and automate the entire cash lifecycle. Jeremy has spent the last 15 years in the tech industry as a serial entrepreneur, startup advisor, and occasional investor. He led global ERP implementation at nanotech startup Digital Instruments, where he got his first glimpse into the challenges of enterprise payments. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
RJ, awesome to be with you and the listeners.
I thought I'd start off with something that you wrote because it was really interesting to me. I found out what matters most in the world by selling it all to sail around the world on a 40-foot boat, spend months exploring the most far reaches of the globe. What did you mean by that?
Well, people don't normally start off with that way, which I love because they want your resume normally. But, I think that isn't a window to this thing where I've learned that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when they're starting off, you crave success, or maybe if you grew up poor like I did, some kind of financial stability or whatever. And so it tends to push towards these things like money, power, or fame. And if you get lucky enough to be part of something that's successful, you learn that those things are fleeting and they're not as intrinsic. So for me, after the first tech company I was at that did quite well, I had a midlife crisis at 20. And that midlife crisis at 20, what I realized was everyone around me wasn't happy once, they reached success or whatever. And so instead, I kind of started searching for meaning. And so it's a very long story, but the short version is I went from New York and I sold everything I had and I jumped on a small sailboat and I intended to go back to California because a bet in a pub, and I'd never been on a sailboat before. And instead, I got about 6 months into that process, got down to Panama and said, this is amazing, let's keep going. And I crossed the Pacific and decided to go across the world. And what I learned out of that process was that there's this amazing ability for us to do the things we're passionate about. And that could be in work, and it could be in life, or it could be even sort of spiritual or metaphysical. And so what matters most is to find our calling. And so turned out my calling wasn't as incredible as it was to end up at some small island and surf all day, as fun as that was. But my calling was to ultimately come back and kind of do what I love, but maybe in a more meaningful way. And so, that 2 years at sea in a small little boat taught me a lot.
It's an incredible thing that you did, and not everyone takes the time to explore detached. They're just continually striving, building companies or moving up in their careers. That moment when maybe you received a windfall from the company, being sold, can you take me back to the distinct kind of feeling that you had? Because it takes quite a bit to just embark on a journey.
Yeah, I think sailing for me in that process, it was a little bit like startups. Actually, you don't know. It's better to not know how difficult things are. Right. And so oftentimes the greatest entrepreneurs, they succeed at industries that maybe they actually didn't come from because there's a little bit of a desire to do something big and ambitious, yet just enough ignorance to not know how difficult it was. And so I think that was true in the sailing case, right? So literally, I'd never been on a sailboat. A bunch of friends said, hey, you're from California, but you moved to New York. You seem like you're kind of ready to move back. You've done enough winters out here and do it in an interesting way. And so everyone was betting. And so I think I didn't know what I was taking. And I actually remember going to the harbors and yacht clubs there and being like, yeah, I think I want to try to sail to Panama. And people were like, what are you talking about? And so they told me I was going to die and that this little 30-foot boat, there's no way it was going to happen. And in some ways they were right. But on the other hand, I remember I had this moment where I was like, well, actually, have you ever done that? And it turned out all they'd generally done is gotten martinis, on their sunset cruise. So they probably weren't actually like the right people to ask. And when you started asking people who were willing to take big risks, you'd learn that it was possible. It was hard, but it's possible. And I think that's true in entrepreneurship. And so for me, when I think about the first successful company I was at, I wasn't the founder, but I was early at a company, and I saw it go from very small to very large, and it became a public company and got acquired and then ultimately rolled up to a public company. And in the same way, I got to see what like big risk takers actually do and what real company building is like. And it's not easy. And I think the greatest things are built to last. And so, I think you got to choose the thing that you really feel like you're going to be passionate about, because starting a company is, a 10-year journey and it's a long slog. But if you love it, you're going to enjoy it. And I think it's kind of the same way it was when I also jumped over and did some sailing. So,
well, we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Paystand. I do have one other question related to that experience of sailing around, and that is, do you think that helped maybe position you mentally to be more balanced, perhaps, when you were later embarking on your entrepreneurial endeavors?
Yeah, I think it did a few things. I don't know about if I've ever found balance. I actually think more about living holistically. And so what I think is it did a few things for me. One, it helped elongate my time horizon. So I'm a pretty type A guy. And the passages, particularly across the Pacific, are extremely long. Like, it'll take you, when you leave the mainland of Americas to the first Pacific Islands, that could be 6 weeks at a sea, like not seeing anything, a month and a half. So can you imagine that? And so, you get into this rhythm. And for me, that rhythm was really important because I went crazy for the first like couple of weeks, and then you start to settle in, and then you start to really understand. And one of the things it did for me was it helped me understand that, so much in my life was chasing things, maybe because you grow up with less or whatever. And instead, what this was I realized, every day in that rhythm, we caught water from the rain to survive, which is incredible. And then we caught fish to eat, which is incredible, for 6 weeks, on a long passage. And that really taught me about abundance. The notion that actually there is so much in life that actually is there from, sort of however you think about it, from the divine. And it's there, and it's not a zero-sum game at all. And so I think that really changed my business outlook. The other thing I think it really changed is, I think when you're building companies, you often get caught up in like the grind of every day. And so when I think about like, how do you do things that are sustainable? We had this moment where lightning hit the boat. And when lightning hit the boat, we lost all the electronics. And so this was kind of before the age of like, cell phones and GPSs and everything. And so that was really problematic, because if you're out in the middle of the ocean and you're off a little bit, like you could end up in Antarctica, and it could be quite bad. And so what I learned to do was I had some very, very basic training on sailing by the stars. And so every night after we lost the electronics, you actually had to take out the sextant and like look at where our North Star was and, sort of make sure we're pointed in the right direction. And then the other thing you could do was every day you could kind of make sure you're taking the 1 degree changes to make sure on the steering wheel that you're headed roughly in that direction. And everything else you really couldn't control. Like everything else was outside of your control. And I think that's true with business building as well. It's true that I think the main things are you headed in the right direction? Do you know your North Star? And then on the daily basis, are you working to improve and make sure you're calibrating towards that direction? And a lot of the rest of it is just stuff that stresses us out in the middle.
Fantastic. Let's talk about how you came up with the idea for Paystand.
Yeah, so I never thought that my kind of life's calling would be in B2B payments. That's kind of weird. So like most people, you think about what your parents did. My parents never went to college. My mom's side of the family came from Mexico before I was born. She married this blue collar construction worker, white guy, and they kind of did the field work and the construction work. So by all accounts, I should be kind of like a day laborer. And so like, wow, technology is so cool, like to change the trajectory of your life, first of all. And so because I was fortunate enough, education really changed the trajectory of my life and got involved in technology when I was young and saw what startups could do. My life ended up what I think most parents want, which is that their kids do a little better than themselves. And I think that's kind of the American dream. It's so cool. Stuff kind of still happens. And I think the other part of what I'd say the American dream of is beyond your kid doing a little better, you also, I think you want to do better yourself. And for most people, that's to buy their own home. So they worked for 20 years to buy, the first home. It's 800 square foot house. It's like 1.5 bedroom, like little pizza box. But, it was kind of like their life's work. And unfortunately, and it's a long story, but the short version is after some tragedy in the family in 2008, they ended up becoming caught up with one of the many millions of Americans who, when the banks failed in the financial crisis of 2008, they lost their home. And, that just sucks, man. That sucks. And so I remember being in New York, and there's this thing called Occupy Wall Street, where there's a lot of people in society that were pissed, that felt like the system had let them down. Maybe in some ways people still feel this way. And so I just remember this visceral moment where I'd been working in tech and I was going into one of the banks in Wall Street. And then people were like rioting and throwing rocks, from the parks with signs up, saying like, why is things too big to fail? And why do the banks get bailed out? And I had this moment, I was just like, who am I? Am I the son of this sort of American dream, or this person who's now, been blessed and working in tech and financial services? And so I just believe that technology could be this enabling force for good. And financial services, out of that experience for me, viscerally means that it has let us and society down. And I think it could be fairer and better. And so that took me on a journey of grad school on discovering why banks were too big to fail, why there were systematic problems in financial services, why it is so corrupt, and what things like decentralization and new fair financial infrastructure like Bitcoin and blockchain can do to change how the financial system works to make it fairer for all of us. And so that's kind of what I've spent the last 15 years of my life kind of working since.
And so Paystand comes about, and you've raised close to $100 million for it. Maybe just to get a quick snapshot of how you went from the idea to where it is today, because you've processed billions of dollars of payments. So can you give us the quick history?
Yeah, so we started Paystand. It came out of the work that I was doing, grad work, that I was in Bitcoin and blockchain very early, which is new fundamental financial infrastructure. And the reality, what I learned was most of my career leading up to that was I worked with enterprise companies, and I worked enterprise companies that had mostly dealt with financial services. And so I knew that on the enterprise and business to business side, which is what Paystand is a business to business payment network. I knew that there were large systematic problems like expensive fees, very slow sort of cost to bill people, lots of reconciliation, large systems, no automation. This is stuff that was built in the 70s. So think manual checks, wires, and a bunch of humans sort of chasing down a lot of money, which is the lifeblood of how a company works. And so my realization was blockchain and Bitcoin were transformative infrastructure to society, but most people only were thinking about it on the consumer end. And my realization, because I believe a lot of what professional calling is where personal passion meets professional experience. And my realization was my experience was there were broken things on the commercial or the enterprise side. And this new technology was only being applied to the consumer side so far. So today, over 100 million Americans hold Bitcoin. People all over the globe use it for ways to be able to fight inflation and sort of financial repression. But very few were using that same technology for how big companies could be able to be more efficient. And so we applied that technology, and we're the largest commercial payment network on the blockchain. We process over 10 billion in payment volume. So most people think it's not real. It is. We're almost 2% of all account usage, account to account payments in businesses in the US. And we have about 1 million businesses on platform. So when people think like Bitcoin or blockchain aren't real, what I would say is we have a real company creating real value for organizations, and we're scaling incredibly fast. And we're really eating at the businesses, that are legacy financial infrastructure like Visa, MasterCard, sort of the clearing houses, like with checks and wires. And we're making companies more efficient, which I think is good for our economy, and that's good for our society, and ultimately good for financial fairness.
And is it fairly seamless for any business to begin using your solutions, or do they have to have some type of blockchain integrated into their software?
It's a great question. We've made it so that people don't need to sort of think about the technology at all. So it's all behind the scenes. So you don't use Bitcoin, you don't use blockchain. You just think about it in dollars and pesos and euros, et cetera. And we think of ourselves as a bridge company. So we think something like blockchain is really one of the big two compute concepts of this generation, just like AI, it's AI and blockchain, we really think are the main two big compute units. And so just like when the internet started, you needed a Google and you needed, an Amazon to make it useful for consumers, but then you need a Salesforce type company to make it useful, the internet, for businesses in a way that was helpful for them. We sort of do that. So we say, hey, there's this new financial infrastructure, but we're going to make it super seamless for you. You're still going to receive your money as you would. You're still going to pay as you would, but we're just going to leverage that so you can get your money faster. You can make it completely automated and self-driving. So it's kind of co-pilot to receive all your invoices and your bills, et cetera. And you're going to do it, and we're just going to eliminate all your fees. So that's probably what we're best known for, is all the fees that would come from wires or credit cards or ACH or clearinghouses. We make those go to zero. And so that has huge bottom line effects for the customer, but their customer experience is just a delightful, modern, Venmo-like experience, but sort of for a large enterprise.
Got it. And you have some reputable investors backing you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you interact with them and what that partnership is like?
One of the things I've learned over time is that you don't want to think about capital as optimizing for the economics. Those are important, but really what you want to think about is for like long-term partnerships. And so, we were very blessed that we got to optimize for people who, knew the space very well. So our lead investors are folks like that help start or lead PayPal, Coupa, which is a large enterprise financial service, Cabbage, which is a large financial lending company, et cetera, Plaid, a bunch of kind of what I'd call the who's who of financial services. So that's important. First, do they know the space? Are they going to add value in the boardroom? And so we're very, very blessed because I learn stuff every day. And then second, I think it's a long-term partnership. Like building companies takes time. And so you want people on the cap table who are trying to build towards the same mission you are. That's where alignment, I've been in prior boards where the biggest issue is really misalignment around kind of like what the expectations are. And in our case, we've been really clear. We want to build a big, public, independent, category defining, enduring company that proves that this sort of new financial infrastructure is both good for society and real economically and good for customers. And ultimately, the way to do that is to build size and scale. And so, that aligns the investor's goal, but it also aligns the staying power of the mission. And so we've been really, really blessed that we've been doing this for quite some time now. We've raised over 100 million. The company is in a place where it's profitable. And so, I think we are able to think long, with partners that I think I learned from and want the best for the company.
What's the best advice that you would share with another entrepreneur that is seeking to scale a business?
I think the last couple of years have been the first down market for a lot of younger entrepreneurs. And so I was there right after our company went public in 2001 when the crash happened and what that did for like the older executives who, watched 70% of their stock price get wiped out. And the CEO getting up the next day. And I learned a lot and was like, we're the same company as we were yesterday. And so it's our job to just deliver great value to our customers and create sort of a better sort of economy and have staying power. And that had a big effect on me. And then I was there in 2008 and 2009, both on the financial crisis, but also what did that do to the capital markets? And great companies were built out of that stage in the tech world. And so now what I think's happened is sort of a new re-reckoning, which is to build great companies, you have to have durable, enduring, staying power, especially when it's hard. And I think a lot of startup founders, especially the younger ones, kind of optimize for this fail fast mentality, or they optimize kind of for short-term economics. And I think if you're going to build something great, it's going to take time, like over a decade. Like all the stats are, if you want to build a great company, it's 1 to 2 decades, right? So first, just know that going in, because that will change how you operate. And then second, make sure the thing you're working on, they say it's eating glass and running through walls. Like, so make sure it's the thing that you actually want to spend a significant part of your career doing. And I don't think people really think that through all the way. They're just like, oh, I was a great executive at one cool startup. Like, let me go create a company. And you're like, you have a lot of stewardship to your investors, to your customers, to your employees. And it's kind of on you to go build something that lasts. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm. What drives you?
Yeah, I'm super missional and impact. Like, I think I'm this weird outlier case where I'm extremely competitive and want to be the best. And I want to go, dent the world. But I've just gotten to a point in my life where I just don't care about money, power, and fame. The only thing I care about is really like, does the impact of the work I'm doing actually matter? And what's the way to maximize it the most? And so it's, it's kind of this weird case where people get around me and they're like, I don't understand. He doesn't care about these things, but then he really cares about these things, right? And so it's for me, it's just life is such a precious gift. Like the fact that we get to choose what we want to work on is so cool. Like for most of human civilization, we didn't. We were just like, whatever our parents did, that's what we do. And probably most of the time it was a grind. So the fact that you get to choose to imagine the world differently and play a part in it, man, that fires me up. So.
Awesome. Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Ooh, this might be cheesy, but when I think about my dad, he wasn't educated and knew nothing about tech. But the one thing he did for me was just say, like you could do or be anything you want if you put your grind into it. And he demonstrated that by working hard every day and then just painting a future. And it's just amazing what that does to people. Like, it's just amazing when you speak life into somebody's ability to like do something like bigger than themselves. Whew, man, it is transformative. And so I think that more than anything has allowed me to maybe rise above my station. And so whether you're a parent or whether you're a leader, each one of those words that you use can change someone's life by just speaking life into them.
Yeah, amazing. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity cause or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm so excited about right now is something we call Paystand.org. And that is the charitable arm of Paystand.com. And among other things that we're trying to prove at the company is that you can do business building in a missional way, and it can have impact far beyond your company building. And so the way that works is Paystand.org is driving financial inclusion and financial empowerment in underrepresented areas all over the globe through Bitcoin and circular economies, which are sort of financial empowerment tools. And so, we've started that project now almost 3 years ago. It's amazing how fast it's grown. We've helped grants from over 20 countries. We've affected over 70,000 kids. We have sort of centers in dozens and dozens of cities all over the world. We're the primary backer of many, many heartwarming stories you hear about sort of Bitcoin in places like El Salvador and Guatemala and Peru that are helping people pull out of trafficking and sort of abuse, and instead like giving them the tools to be able to control their own destiny. And the way we're doing that, which I'm really, really excited about, is, we take our revenue and our profits and we give it back. And we think that too often corporate sort of responsibility has been the sort of token view, and we want it to be meaningful. And so we give 10% of all of our profits to Paystand.org, which then sort of disseminates. And then, they're actually actively involved in projects. They don't just give capital, though they do. And so for us, we think it's just one more important leg to prove that capitalism actually can be a force for good, that too often capitalism actually has felt like this, thing that I think the younger generation just kind of has written off. And I think it's fair. It's like banking has been super corrupt, financial services has been super corrupt, and capitalism in general, hasn't necessarily always been about like a holistic view of the world. And so, I hope we can be part of this bigger movement that creates great companies, that creates great value for our customers and shareholders, helps improve the economy, but then also says it's incumbent on us to be good neighbors and move the world in good places.
Wonderful. Well, Jeremy, I want to thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today. This has been a great conversation.
RJ, this is rad. You've got a great listener group. I listen to you guys, so I'm just honored to be with you, man. It's super cool.
Thank you.